The search for two escaped convicts now centering on an area 3 miles from their prison in Dannemora, New York, after police bloodhounds picked up a scent. This, as word comes, the prison employee who may have helped in the escape had been previously investigated for possible involvement with one of the inmates. So was this pair working her over just to get her to help him bust out of prison? Let's bring in Dr. Michael Wellner. He is one of America's top forensic psychiatrists, and we'll discuss a little bit more about the grooming process, how they may have selected this woman, if indeed she is the person who helped them escape from prison, as investigators have suggested. What do you think it is about her specifically, or what makes a person more vulnerable to be targeted by inmates?
Corrections experience has taught me that the most important vulnerability is access. We need to appreciate the vulnerability of prison employees the way we do our children with pedophiles. You don't say, well, this child's more vulnerable to a pedophile or that child. You recognize that the pedophile has an agenda with someone who is physically close that they can control. And so what we saw in this prison was someone who had the motivation and the capability of, for all intents and purposes, being an emotional hacker. This is, you know, to say that someone is a psychopath without necessarily examining him is impossible, but to say that only psychopaths are capable of this ignores the realities of prison.
But you really believe that he or they versus her are the ones we should be focusing on in terms of their psyche. They're experts at what they do.
It's about them, or it's about him. It's about someone who is motivated enough and capable enough of just sizing up anyone that they're close enough to, that if you have access and enough time, you can pick up someone's weak spots and then exploit them. And I think that that's what happened.
How would they go about trying to maybe groom her, for lack of a better word, into an accomplice?
The same way a priest grooms a parishioner. The same way a college professor grooms an adult student who's capable of making independent decisions. Working the humanity of the relationship. You can't work in a prison unless you experience your charges as human. And yet at the same time, you have to maintain a distance. So it's about a boundary being eroded, but boundaries are never bashed down the way they broke out. Boundaries are eroded drop by drop.
Is she a victim of sociopaths, you think?
I think that she is a victim of proximity, and it's one of the vulnerabilities of working in a prison. Look, we had a case here in New York and it's a case that I worked on. Ronnell Wilson, who was on death row for killing 2 cops, and then when he was retried in his capital murder trial, they found out that he actually manipulated a prison guard into having his baby so he could make the phony argument that he's going to be a dad and he shouldn't get the death penalty. My point is, it's not about her, it's about the motivation and the access that 2 people have together. The only caution that I think the audience should take away is, we all of us, see what we need to see in other people. So there's something about her that saw what she needed to see in someone else. When your own inner voice is something you switch off because you're seeing whom you want to see, like the crying game, you've got to listen to other people around you, and apparently in this situation, people had alerted her, had called attention to something about the relationship being inappropriate. If you can't listen to your own inner voice, you've got to listen to the other people around you, because they may be your next warning mechanism.
What do you think about people comparing what we're seeing here and Joyce Mitchell to other women who we've talked about in years past falling in love with killers?
Well, from professional experience, it's actually unbelievable that the amount of attention that's fashioned on, or that's focused on notorious killers, even people who target women, even people who are seemingly unlikable individuals. And I think that it has every bit to do with how news media make folks larger than life, they humanize them, and then people react to them in such a way to say, if only, and they start getting fan mail, and they start having people reach out to them. Look, I had an instance with a Guantanamo terrorist where I am convinced that the national security correspondent who was covering the case for a major Canadian newspaper, she'd marry him tomorrow if she could. You know, so the quality of that manipulation with someone who is larger than life, and I think it's a key element here to solve this crime. If you humanize these folks who are on the run, and forget that these are folks, someone chopped someone up, someone else killed someone who was serving the public. then you feed into a cynical public. That's the only way they can stay on the run. If a cynical public helps them, you create Eric Rudolph. If you remember why they got there and that they're not only physically dangerous, but psychologically dangerous, you isolate people who run out of food, and then capture is inevitable. And so the public has to help law enforcement. This is a case where the entire community has to be involved in the capture so that we have public safety.
Well, let's better try to humanize these men. I mean, lawmen who've faced Richard Matt have described what they refer to as psychopath charm, saying he cleans up well, he has lots of friends, he's been called a master manipulator. I mean, is that common among prisoners, particularly these hardcore criminals?
What I've learned from interfacing with prisoners and examinees are the psychopaths that we see in the movies who are larger-than-life characters. The folks that one really needs to be concerned about are people who are understated, where you don't even feel like you're being manipulated. A psychopath, for example, envision this. A psychopath is a person who can pish down your back and convince you that it's raining. A good psychopath is a person who pishes down your back, convinces you that it's raining, you know it's not, and you thank him for the experience.
They know how to manipulate your mind.
That's the difference between someone who's unusually manipulative and the impact that they have on the people around him, whom they convince, this is whom I want to see, even though I know my eyes are lying.
Fascinating discussion, Dr. Michael Wellner. Thank you so much for giving us that great insight this morning. We do appreciate it, and hopefully it does help track down these killers. We also want to mention that Dr. Wellner is inviting people to participate in some landmark research about what makes a crime depraved, and you can learn more about that at depravitystandard.org.